Georgia state flag was adopted in 1879 and has changed several times over the years. Georgia's most controversial flag was adopted in 1956, and this flag was known as the Confederate flag. This flag was found to be offensive by many people because it stood for segregation. The segregation was between blacks and whites. The blacks said the flag stood for racism and slavery, while the whites said the flag stood for Southern heritage. When you see the Confederate flag, what comes to your mind?
I was raised as a Southern kid, and as I tell some folks, I was in high school. I say facetiously, but I was in high school before I knew the South lost the Civil War. But as a student of history, it became very apparent to me that the Confederate flag and the whole Confederate movement was really for the purpose of preserving slavery. At least that was the dominant reason. And I knew that slavery was wrong, and that the Confederate flag, whenever I saw the Ku Klux Klan, they always had the Confederate flag or some other extremist group. So what had happened was that instead of preserving history, the Confederate flag had become really a banner of defiance and racism, and that's what disturbed me.
Over the years, Georgia's official state flag became a controversial topic. At the time the Confederate flag was adopted as the state flag, racial tensions were high over the U.S. Supreme Court ruling of Brown v. Board of Education. The governor for the state of Georgia at this time was Governor Griffin. Griffin wanted Georgia public schools to remain segregated. According to Mike Owen's newspaper article, Griffin's floor leader, Representative Denmark Groover, said the new flag would leave no doubt in anyone's mind that Georgia will not forget the teachings of Lee and Stonewall Jackson, and that this will show that we in Georgia intend to uphold what we stood for, will stand for, and will fight for. Anything we in Georgia can do to preserve the memory of the Confederacy is a step forward. This statement shows how many Georgians were against equality. The civil rights movement was taking place at this time, and the civil rights leaders and African Americans were seeking equality and used protests, boycotts, and other methods to draw attention and enact change. During the late 1980s, black legislators pushed to have the Confederate battle emblem removed with no success. In 1999, Senator Roy Barnes was elected governor and began to think about changing the state flag. He had promised his supporters that he would adjust the flag when he was elected. Barnes was primarily supported by the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus, the civil rights groups such as the National Association for Advancement of Colored People and Southern Christian Leadership Conference. His victory was attributed to large numbers of black voters. Barnes agreed with his supporters that the flag needed to be changed.
Who had the most significant influence on your decision to change the state flag, and how did they influence you?
I think the greatest influence was just my knowledge of history, but there is one story I'll tell you. John Lewis, as you probably know, was a great civil rights leader. He's in Congress now in Atlanta. And he came by to see me in the governor's office one day, and he told me, he says, I know you're trying to determine what to do about this flag. And he says, I'm not here to tell you what to do. He said, what I am here to tell you is that when I went over the bridge at Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma that fateful Sunday when he was almost beaten to death, he said the last thing that I remember before I lost consciousness was a Confederate flag on the helmet of an Alabama state trooper. And he says, I never have forgotten that. And that had a profound, effect on me, giving me that personal perspective.
In 2001, Governor Barnes began taking steps to change the flag to a flag without the Confederate battle emblem. He introduced House Bill 16, which would return the flag to the pre-1956 flag. He secured votes to ensure the bill passed. Legislation passed and the 1956 flag was replaced by the new flag designed by architect Cecil Alexander and flew from 2001 to 2003. Governor Barnes faced the psychological barriers of segregation and legal barriers associated with the flag. He broke through barriers to change the flag to a flag that stood for equality among all the people. The controversy of the flag still remains a part of history. The civil rights movement played a huge part in the change of the flag by paving the way for equality. Governor Barnes stayed loyal to his supporters and fought for changing the flag. He knew changing the flag could cost him his re-election and chose to do what he felt was morally right. Many voters were angry over Governor Barnes changing the state flag, and ultimately his actions cost him the election when he ran for re-election against Sonny Perdue. Sonny Perdue promised voters an opportunity to vote on the flag, and this was the main focal point of his campaign.
What was the deciding factor in choosing to change the flag before being re-elected?
That's a good question. Very specific. Everybody says, well, you should have been re-elected and then taken up the flag. And that probably would have been the correct thing to do. But again, I was trying to cut off all of that controversy before it paralyzed the state. And, I finally came to the conclusion that I was going to have to act on it, and I was going to have to act one way or another now. And so when I did that, what was the right thing to do was pretty easy for me. I have a different view of the way that people should hold public office. If they do what's right, even though the folks get mad and defeat you, that's their right, the right of the people. But it should not stop you in doing what is right at that time. And so, that the deciding factor was, even if it led to my defeat, I was not going to allow Georgia to become like South Carolina when they couldn't do anything over there because of the controversy about it.
The new flag that was known as the Barnes flag was replaced on March 5, 2004. The psychological barriers of segregation and the legal barriers did not prevent Governor Barnes from changing the state flag. Governor Barnes was awarded the John F. Kennedy Profile Courage Award in 2003 for having the courage to break through barriers to change the Georgia state flag. Today, Georgia has a flag that represents all of the people thanks to former Governor Roy Barnes.
When you reflect back on changing the state flag and the impact it made on the state of Georgia, how does it make you feel?
Makes me feel good. Georgia is one of the most prosperous states in the nation. We have Fortune 500. We have 16 Fortune 500 companies that have their headquarters in Georgia. And I think that if we had been involved in the controversy for all of those last 20 years, that Georgia would not have grown like it had or become known as the progressive place. A progressive place and one that was very open to new business and was willing to face its past so that it could prosper.